Whether you like it or not, making money in construction is more than just building stuff. It's more than just building stuff on time and budget. Yes, obviously, that plays a huge part, but to make money in construction, you need to build something and then get paid for it. That's where contracts come in. Unless you are a commercial person, most people I know in the construction industry hate contracts. Construction contracts contain hundreds of pages with multiple attachments. They all reference different parts of the documents, and we can all agree they're not written to be user-friendly. But as I'm going to show you in this course, contracts are actually unbelievably simple. You just need a framework to understand them and to learn how to use them to your advantage. In this course, I'm going to show you everything you need to know and understand about construction contracts and procurement so you can boost your margins, boost your cash flow, and reduce your risk. We're going to be covering why contracts matter and how they're used, what actually is a contract, the structure and contents of a contract, and then we'll jump into contract management and go through the 4 domains of construction contract management. We're going to talk about both upstream contract management, downstream contract management across the formation and administration phases. So that's the 4 domains of contract management. We've got tendering, which is upstream contract formation. We've got procurement, which is downstream contract formation. Then we've got both head contract administration and subcontract administration. Each of these domains will talk about the tools and techniques you can use to boost your margins, reduce your risk, and increase your cash flow. So let's start with the big important question: why do contracts matter in construction? So I want to answer this question by first setting the scene. So imagine we're building a new road construction project, and I first want to understand what's involved in the process. Well, we need to start with feasibility and planning. We have to decide whether the road is worthwhile to build. We'll need a concept design. We'll need some cost estimates. We then go on to our design development and design approvals. We need detailed drawings and specifications that tell us exactly what to build. They have to comply with the feasibility approvals, our budget constraints, and also our development approvals. We then need to start with the bulk earthworks. We'll need to move soil, move a huge amount of cubic meters of dirt to make way for the road formation. We can then install underground utilities, electricity, lighting. Maybe we'll have to relocate some services like gas or telecommunications. We'll then need to actually construct the road formation, the asphalt paving, put in any sort of landscaping and roadside furnitures. On top of that, we'll need a team of people planning, coordinating all these things, managing the impact to the community, managing all the separate traffic diversions. Now, when we map out all these steps from the initial conception and feasibility to the end opening of the road, all the different construction activities, all the different approvals, design processes, all the different expertise that are needed, we can very quickly establish that no single company or public government department could complete all of these works in-house. It's just not feasible considering how many different sorts of expertise and skills are needed to construct a road. There needs to be a way for separate companies to come together and all work towards this same objective of building a road. Now, this comes to the idea of an agreement. For any 2 companies to collaborate and work together, they need to have some sort of agreement. One party needs to agree to do something, the other party needs to agree to compensate for them. For example, say the project owner, who's done the early stage design and feasibility studies for the road, decides that they do in fact want to build this road. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to go to a general contractor or a head contractor and engage them to do this. They want a single person they can pay to deliver this project. So the project owner will say, I'll pay you $30 million, and the contractor is saying, I'll build this bridge for you. They're making an agreement. One person's offering a service, the other person's offering to pay them for it. A contract, therefore, is just a legal tool used to formalize this agreement. So fundamentally, that's why contracts matter in construction, because we need all these different parties to work together. We need them to form agreements, and the contract is the legal tool that formalizes this agreement. When we say they formalize it, it means it's legally binding, which fundamentally means the courts will enforce it. The contract defines who is responsible for what. This means what and how they're going to get paid, when will the work get done, what risks are they responsible for, how does changes to the scope of the project get managed, what happens if arguments or disputes arise, and any other relevant terms and conditions. The contract is the legal mechanism, the way we formalize this agreement. Now, the attitude of a lot of people in the construction industry is that contracts are paperwork, and once you sign the contract, it pretty much sits in a folder and never gets referenced for the entirety of the job. So we've established why contracts need to exist, but then there's this other prevailing belief that I see time and time again in the construction industry is that people think contracts just get signed, they sit in a folder, and nothing ever happens with them. So now I want to talk about specifically for contractors why effective contract management isn't just a formal process that is used to capture an agreement. It's actually a tool at your disposal that you can use to boost your profit margins, reduce your risk, and improve your cash flow. So I want to give you one really simple example from my own career why I know contracts don't just sit in folders. So I was working as a contractor on a major electrical construction project, and the procurement of the package for our client was rushed. They really pushed us to sign the contract to get onto site to start working because they had deadlines that they had to meet. We agreed to a whole lot of things with our client verbally or in meetings, and we had this shared understanding of how the scope was going to work. Things like we'd priced on a bill of quantities, and then the client agreed that the bill of quantities was a source of truth over the drawings, and if there was a change in the quantities, there'd be a change to the contract price. None of this stuff was documented to an extent in the scope, but it wasn't clearly spelled out in the scope. What happened? About a month into the project, the client changed their project manager. And so all these issues we were having with the quantities being wrong, not matching the drawings, we thought we were entitled for additional money for. Because it wasn't written in the contract, the new project manager disputed everything. So it's an example where we thought we were relying on a relationship, but we soon realized that if it wasn't documented in the contract, pretty much everything was at our own risk. So using the principle of inversion, let's ask ourselves the question, what happens if you don't manage your contract? Well, you do work you don't need to, and you don't get paid for it. So you're incurring costs and not getting a corresponding increase in revenue. A delay happens, but you don't notify your client in time, and you wear the cost of this delay and potentially incur liquidated damages at the tail end of the contract because you're late in finishing. Your subcontractor underperforms, and you can't have any way to recover the costs of their poor performance. Your client stops paying you, and you have no idea what to do. So these are all situations that can happen if you don't manage the contract effectively. So there's two sides of construction management. There's the side that most construction people intuitively focus on and are in the part they like, the part they're good at, which is doing a good job, delivering the work on time and on budget to the standards in the specifications, building the correct thing and building it under budget and ahead of schedule. We all know we need to do this. Then there comes the contract side of things, which is doing the work, but also getting paid for it. We need to manage the works, but we also need to manage the contract to have a successful project outcome. So I have some stats to back up the claim I'm making that contracts matter. There's a couple of big studies that have showed that improving contract management drastically improves your project performance. McKinsey in 2017 found that poor contract management is responsible for a loss of 5 to 15% in project value. Considering the average margins people operate on are like 10 to 15%, that's a huge amount of money. The World Commerce and Contracting Association found that ineffective contract management leads to an average revenue leakage of 9.2% per project. Again, very similar statistic, a very similar result. You can basically wipe out your profit margin by not managing the contract properly. A KPMG construction survey found that only 31% of contractors say they consistently deliver projects on budget. Contract controls are a key reason why. One of the key reasons they listed was not having effective contract management. Okay, so when I talk about why contract management matters, I always break it down into these three buckets. We've got profit, which is getting a higher revenue than your cost base. We've got risk, that is preventing bad things from happening. And then we've got cash flow, getting paid before you incur costs. Contract management helps you to do all of these things. So increasing your profit. Contract management helps you make claims and then get paid for variations and scope change. So if you do more work, you get paid for more work. It avoids doing unapproved or unnecessary work, so not incurring costs that you shouldn't have. Helps you to justify any extension of times and recover any delay-related costs. So if you're delayed in doing the work, you'll get a corresponding increase in your contract value if you manage the contract effectively, and it helps you to capture any back charges, day works, and entitlements to your subcontractors. So if your subcontractors have underperformed, it helps you avoid paying them additional money or incurring additional costs. Contract management also helps you to lower risk. So to lower the uncertainty that matters to the project, it does this by clarifying who is responsible for what and when. It helps to protect against liability creep and unfair instructions from your client. Helps you to avoid liquidated damages, so risks associated with finishing the project late. Helps you to effectively transfer risks you're responsible to in head contract to your subcontractors, and it helps you to comply with legislation. Result is fewer surprises, stronger protection, and more control of your obligations. And finally, it helps you to improve your cash position. As contractors know, cash isn't always an issue on construction projects, so contract management actually helps you to improve your cash flow, helps you to negotiate favorable contract terms, favorable payment terms in contract formation, helps you to ensure that you make your payment claims on time and you get paid for the work you've done, helps you to use notice procedures to trigger payment claim variations and delays, and it helps you to track and follow up on unpaid invoices using formal contract mechanisms. The result is to get money in your bank before you incur costs. So I know we've already briefly touched on what a contract is, but in this section, I want to dive a little deeper into specifically what is a contract. We know it's a legally enforceable agreement, but let's break that down. Let's look at the specific characteristics that have to be in place for a contract to exist. So a contract, in terms of legal speak, in terms of what the courts refer to it as, it's a legally binding agreement between two parties, and it creates enforceable rights and obligations. So the terms and conditions in a contract, what we're signing up to do and what we're signing up to receive, become enforceable by the courts. Contracts are governed by common law principles. This means judgments by the courts around how contracts will be enforced and interpreted are governed by historic cases. And then based on this, the courts can either award damages or enforce penalties if you go to court. Okay, so the legal foundations of what a contract are means to be legally enforceable, a contract has to meet certain criteria. There needs to be an offer, there needs to be acceptance, there needs to be consideration, so something of value moving between parties, there needs to be an intention to create legal relations, there needs to be capacity to contract, and there needs to be certainty of the terms. So I'll break down what all of these mean so you understand exactly what's involved for a contract to be in place between two parties. Okay, so the first foundation of a contract is the offer. One party must make a clear proposal to enter into a contract. So for in construction, this would typically happen during a tender submission where a client provides a scope of works and a contractor provides a quote and methodology to deliver this work. The offer must be definite and intended to be accepted. For example, contractor saying, we will construct the pavement works for $1.2 million as per the attached scope of works drawing. So that's an offer. That is the first basis of a contract. The next part is acceptance. So the offer is the first step, then that offer must be accepted by the client. So the other party agrees to the terms of the offer without change. So the client comes back and says, no, we want your price to reduce by $300,000, then obviously that is a counter offer and needs to be accepted by the other party. They just can't automatically, unilaterally deduct the price. It must be clear, unconditional, and communicated. And if the response includes changes, it becomes a counter offer, not acceptance of the offer. For example, with the pavement example, the client then says, we accept your tender for the pavement works in full. Now, for a contract to exist, there must be consideration, which means something of value must move between the two parties. So in construction, this is work in exchange for payment. Without consideration, the contract is not enforceable, except in deeds, but they're separate. So the contractor is offered to build the pavement for $1.2 million. The client is then agreeing to pay them $1.2 million. So there's mutual consideration in that example. There's services from the contractor to the client, and then there's the payment from the client to the contractor. Now, for a contract to exist, there also needs to be intention to create legal relations. Both parties must clearly intend to enter into a legal and binding agreement. In commercial and business negotiations, this is presumed by default. For example, if someone sent you a scope of works with a draft form of contract, drawing specifications, and you're saying you're willing to do it for $1.2 million, there's clear intention to create a legal arrangement. If you offer to mow your brother's lawn and for $20, then there's no intention to create a contract, just dealing between friends. So intention to create legal relations is another fundamental thing that has to exist for a contract to exist. There must also be capacity to contract. So both parties must have the legal capacity to enter into a contract. This means they're of legal age and sound mind and have the authority to sign, which will be the biggest one you see in construction companies. For example, a junior graduate engineer on a project isn't going to be able to sign off on a $20 million project, and they would clearly not have the capacity to contract that. So even if they did sign it, it probably wouldn't count for anything because clearly that person would not have the authority, so it would not be enforceable. There must also be certainty of terms. So the contract must be clear enough for a court to interpret and enforce. Vague or ambiguous clauses can make a contract unenforceable or open to dispute. Good contracts will clearly define scope, time, payments, and obligations, and if things are not defined clearly, the courts may not enforce them. Next, I want to move on to talking about some core concepts of construction contract management. So I want to start by talking about the two key roles in any construction contract. We've got the buyer and we've got the seller. The buyer is also referred to as the principal. They're the one acquiring the goods and services. They're paying for something to be done. So for example, of a road construction project, the buyer is the state government, the project developer. They are the ones that want a road to be built, and they're the ones who are going to be paying for it. The seller is also referred to as the contractor. They're the ones providing the goods and services, and they're the ones receiving the payment. So in the example of the road project, they're the general contractor who's going to get paid $30 million to build the bridge. So they're going to be the ones organizing all the labor, plant, materials, subcontractors to do that, and they'll complete the works and receive payment from the buyer. So breaking down these roles and some of the other roles that we typically see in construction contracts. So the principal is the client and the owner. They're the party who commissions the work, pays for it. They set the project objectives. They provide access to the works, and they review any claims to the contractor. The contractor, referred to as the head contractor or general contractor specifically, is the one managing the overall project, and they deliver the work as per the contractor. They manage the program, typically the cost, the subcontractors, and their obligations. Some instances you have a superintendent or a contract administrator. So this is an agent employed by the principal to manage the contract, but they're meant to be impartial and assess any claims from the contractor. You then also have subcontractors. So these are specialist contractors engaged by the contractor to complete specific portions of the project scope. For example, on the road project, the general contractor may engage an electrical subcontractor to complete the street lighting. Then the last party that we have on construction projects is the architect or engineer. They're the professional services provider who prepare the drawings and specifications and the detailed design. Depending on the contract model, they may be working for the contractor or they may be working for the principal. So this leads into the contract model, which is the structure that governs the relationship between all of these different parties. So you might have a design and construct contract, a construct-only contract, an ECI or early contractor involvement, EPC. There's tons of different models that are suited to different projects. And in the early stage, feasibility stage, the principal needs to decide on the best structure for all of these parties to work together, depending on the specifics of the project. We're going to go through all of these models, but to start with, here's an example of a design and construct contract so you can understand what I'm referring to when I'm talking about the contract model. You have a project owner, the one who's deciding what to build and financing it. They're paying a general contractor to deliver the project or a head contractor to deliver the project. head contractor is providing them the service, the building, whatever they're doing. Under a design and construct model, the head contractor engages the designer for the detailed design and engineering, and also engages all of the subcontractors. So the project owner has no commercial relationship with subcontractors or the designer. They engage directly with the head contractor then engages the architect and engineer and the subcontractors. In the same way that the project owner is the buyer and the contractor is the seller in the head contract arrangement, in the subcontract arrangements, the head contractor becomes the buyer, the subcontractor and the designer become the seller. So they're the ones providing the services and the head contractor will pay them for it. When we talk about construction contracts and the relationships between all these different parties, an important concept to understand is the flow down effect. So the flow down effect is basically how requirements move from the principal to the head contractor to subcontractors. The principal originally specifies what they want. They want a bridge that meets these certain requirements. They want it built within 6 months. They have 20-day payment terms, all these different things. They pass these requirements on to the head contractor. Head contractor will typically pass these on to subcontractors. For example, the design drawings might say an 150 mil thick concrete slab in accordance with blah, 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 blah. There's a 24-month defect liability period. What good contractors do is they take the requirements from the head contractor and they pass these on to their subcontractors. They transfer responsibility and risk through this process. Now, there's 2 core stages of contract management. There's the formation stage, the process through which a contract is created between 2 parties, and there's the administration stage. The administration stage is the process of monitoring and facilitating the smooth performance of the works. We form a contract, we agree to terms and conditions, then we deliver the works in accordance with these terms and conditions. Now, we can break this process down into 4 steps. We've got upstream and downstream contract management. So if we're the head contractor, our upstream contractors with the principal, our downstream contractors with our subcontractors. And then there's 2 stages to this process. There's contract formation, where we negotiate and sign a contract. There's contract administration. So forming a contract with our client. Upstream contract formation, we refer to as tendering or quoting. Tendering, quoting, or bidding, whatever the specific term you use is. Then there's procurement, which is downstream contract formation, which is finding subcontractors and suppliers to deliver the works on our behalf. Then once we sign a contract, we move into contract administration. We've got upstream contract formation, which is head contract administration, managing the contract with our client. And we also have subcontractor administration, managing the contract with our subcontractors. Okay, so upstream contract formation or tendering is where we negotiate and sign a contract with our client. This means we need to review the project requirements, submit a quote and conditions of offer that align with the project, negotiate and sign a contract. The goal here is to win a project at a price and terms that we can then ensure we deliver profitably. We always want to be focusing on the terms and conditions of the contract, not just the price we sign up to. Then we've got downstream contract formation or procurement, where we need to identify the packages we need to procure from the market, prepare and issue RFQ documents, review and negotiate the contracts with our suppliers. The goal here is to find the best possible suppliers and subcontractors at the best possible price. We're going to align scope, schedule and risk responsibilities and transfer these obligations to our subcontractors so we're not caught between the requirements of the head contract and the requirements in the subcontracts. Then we've got our upstream and downstream contract administration. So upstream, the focus is getting paid for the work we do and fulfilling our contract obligations, so complying with all the rules the contract specifies to follow. Downstream contract administration is about providing access on time to our subcontractors so they can complete the works. If we're free issuing materials, getting them the materials on time, managing them closely. At the end of the day, we're accountable for the work we do. The worst thing we can do is let and forget, and maintaining an alignment with the head contract. We want to get paid for the work we've done. We want to ensure safety, quality, and performance of our subcontractors, and we want to manage risk. So now we understand the core concepts around contract management. We understand all the different parties, the relationship between these parties defined in the contract model. and also the different stages of the 4 stages of contract management, let's now talk about the structure and contents of a construction contract. So head to the section by giving you a framework of how to think about contracts, because the vast majority of people drastically overcomplicate them. You need to think about a contract as a rule book. They tell you what to do and when. They tell you what work you need to do, exactly what work you need to do, how to get paid for the work you've completed, what to do when things change, what you have to do to finish and sign off the contract, and so on and so forth. They're basically just rule books for the game you're playing. You can think of them as like the rules of a game of chess. If you think about contracts like that, they're going to become way simpler. So let me give you some examples of how you can think of contracts as rule books. Say, for example, you're the contractor managing a project and the materials you plan to order are going to arrive late. Does that matter? Is that important? Well, if you look at what the contract says, so these are clauses from a real contract. Progress. The contractor shall ensure that WUC, the work under the contract, reaches practical completion by the date for practical completion. So what that tells you is you need to finish the work by the date for the contract. If the contractor does not achieve practical completion by this date, they will have to pay liquidated damages. So you will get a fine for not completing the project on time. What does that mean? If your materials are going to come late and they're going to delay completion of the project, it means you're going to get penalized for doing it. So you have to come up with some sort of solution to this problem. It is a problem that does in fact matter. Let me give you another example. Say you're managing a subcontractor and they have a whole lot of defects and issues with the work they've completed, and you keep telling them you have to come back to site and fix your defects. You have to come back to site and fix your defects, but they're ignoring you and they're not doing it. What can you do about this? We'll refer to the contract, the section where it says defective work, and it says if the contractor has failed to come back to site and fix their defects and you've provided them written notice, given the set period of time you've got to allow them to come back and fix their defects. If they haven't come back and fix their defects, referring to this clause in the contract, you are allowed to take out money from their security or money you owe them to go and rectify the defective work. So the contract is giving you a specific process to follow in this exact situation. That's what I mean when I talk about contracts as rule books. You think about contract management as a game. The contract is the rules for how to play. If your subcontractor is failing to fix their defects, there's a process in the contract you can follow to rectify this. Okay, so now we understand this framework of how to think about contracts as just a set of rules. Let's talk about the structure of a contract. So a contract's typically broken down into 3 sections. We've got the general conditions of contracts. So these are standard terms used across many projects. In Australia, we have the AS 4000 series, but in Europe, the UK, America, there's the FIDIC and NEC contracts. They cover general rights and responsibilities, such as payment, time, variations. The extracts I've had in the last 2 slides, they were from general conditions of contracts. We've then got special conditions, for example, project-specific amendments to the general conditions. So these general conditions might be adjusted, and these override or modify the standard rules and often contain bigger risks. Then we've got this attachments and supporting documentations. For example, to the general condition of contract, you might attach a scope of works, technical specifications, drawings, bill of quantities, and so on. Now I'm going to touch on some core concepts around the contract and the specific terms and conditions you need to understand. First one, which is always the most important one, is the scope of works, which defines the work you need to do. The scope is what you're contracted to complete. Typically contains deliverables, so what you're required to build, boundaries, where the work stops, where your interfaces are, any exclusions, what's specifically not included in your scope of works, and any interfaces or dependencies you'll have on other contractors or the client. Scope is always an issue on construction projects, and it's always the biggest source of disputes. Why is this? Well, because construction projects are often technically complicated and difficult to understand. There's a lot of different tasks involved, there's a lot of different steps, and the scope is open to misinterpretation. There's always misalignments and misinterpretations. Fundamentally, what drives the cost of the project The cost is the work you need to complete. So there's always going to be disputes around scope, because if you do less work, you save money. The principal has contracted work and they've got you to do it. They don't have to pay extra for another contractor to complete the work. So scope is probably where the biggest disputes around cost are going to be. And there's always documents that conflict each other. The drawings might say one thing, the specifications might say another, and the bill of quantities might suggest something else. So you need to understand the order of precedence, what order these documents need to be read and understood in. So what are the tools we use in contract management to manage scope? There might be things like scope checklists. We use a work breakdown structure. We might have scope briefings with subcontractors. Fundamentally though, what we want to do is, if we're the head contractor, we want to take the requirements in the head contractor and make our subcontractors responsible for these same portions of the work. So it's always back to back with our subcontractors. This is fundamentally going to help us avoid scope creep and undocumented changes. So basically where we do additional work and don't get paid for it. The next fundamental concept is time, when we need to have completed the work by. So these are things like the key dates, like the date we meant to start the work, any specific milestones we need to meet, when we need to complete the work, the defect liability period, whether there's any sectional completions, but also we might have specific responsibilities to maintain a program. We might have to issue an updated program every 2 weeks or every month. In addition to this, contracts typically have liquidated damages. So liquidated damages are a penalty that's enforced if we're late in completing the works. They might be $1,000 a day, they might be $10,000 a day, they might be $1 million a day, depending on the size of the project. But basically, as there's the scope defines what we need to do, time defines when we need to do it, and because time matters so much in construction, we'll get penalized if we're late. The construction program is how we communicate the progress of the project to our client and to our subcontractors. It'll show the critical path, the series of activities that if delayed, delay project completion, float, and any access dates to the site. So we need access to site on this date to complete our work. This is the critical path. This is the series of tasks that if delayed will delay our finish date, and any activities that aren't on the critical path will have some float associated with them. The contract program is the basis of any claims we can make. If our client is late in giving us access to site, we can claim for delays. If a client disrupts a non-critical path activity but changes the way we're working but doesn't impact our finish date, we can prove and justify claiming costs for disruption. Core concept around time and a topic most people love, but it's a term people throw around without fully understanding what it means, are extension of time claims. So extension of time claims is when we adjust the finish date in the contract. To do this, we need to maintain a construction program. So we need to have a program that shows a sequence of tasks, the order they need to be completed in, and what date we need access from our client. To claim an extension of time, we need to just demonstrate that a critical path activity has been delayed. For example, if we're doing a constructor-only project and the date in our program that we need the IFC or the issue for construction design is the 15th of February, if that date elapses and we don't have the IFC design, we can claim a critical path activity has been delayed. So we need to adjust the finish date in the contract. When we're claiming, we can claim just time, which is adjusting the completion date of the contract, or we can also claim costs. For example, because the finish date in the contract is pushed out, we're going to need our project manager and site sheds on site for another month, which is going to cost an extra $20,000 or whatever it is. So that's why you can see that time is such an important concept of any project, because it has such an impact on both risk through liquidated damages, but also cost. The next core concept in contracts is payment. How and when do we receive payment for the works completed, or how and when do we have to pay our subcontractors for the works they've completed? Payment, when it's defined in the contract, will include the payment mechanism, whether it's lump sum, schedule of rates, or cost reimbursable, the pricing schedule, so how our clients or how our subcontractors will bill us, the claim cycle, whether it's monthly or we get paid based on milestones, any security we have to give, so whether the client will hold retention or whether they'll hold a bank guarantee. Again, when I spoke about why contract management matters so much, it's because cash is king in construction. Construction operates on thin margins, and if you get delayed in getting paid, you can very quickly be cash negative on a project. Managing the contract is how we manage our cash cycle. Okay, so what are the different payment mechanisms in the contract? Well, we've got fixed costs. This is where there's a fixed fee paid to the contractor for the delivery of a fixed scope of works. We've got schedule of rates. So this is where there's a fixed amount paid per unit of work complete. For example, contractor might get paid $128 per linear meter of subsurface drainage. If they do 1,000 meters, they'll get paid $128,000. If they do 2,000, they'll get paid whatever double that is. I can't do the maths that fast in my head. Cost reimbursable is where there's payment to the contractor for the actual works completed, plus an agreed upon margin. So in this situation, the contractor has to provide evidence of the actual costs they've incurred. Or finally, less common on subcontracts, but common on bigger projects now, is a target cost contract, where the project costs are agreed between the client and the contractor, and then they share any overruns between the parties. Now, as a contractor, you need to be able to effectively make payment claims. That's the process through which the principal pays the contractor. So how does this process happen? Well, each month or on a regular cycle throughout the project, the contractor will submit a payment claim to the client. They'll provide evidence of the work they've completed and what items in the payment schedule they're claiming against. What happens then is that the principal will then review this payment claim. Maybe the contractor is claiming to say they've done 1,000 meters of drainage, but the principal thinks they've only done 950 meters. They'll negotiate this and agree on the value of the claim, and then issue an invoice or a payment certificate. Once the contractor has completed the work, they'll submit a final payment claim, which will start the defects liability period. And at the completion of the defects liability period, the principal will return the contractor's security and they'll finish the contract. Okay, so how are payment claims typically structured? Well, you typically structure a payment claim in an Excel workbook, and each month the contractor makes a payment claim to the principal. For example, for street lighting civil works, we've got here, there's a rate in the contract for each of the different types of trenches, which probably correspond to different widths and depths, a rate for light pole foundations, a rate for pit installations, a rate for distribution board foundations. There's a quantity and a rate against each of these, and each month the contractor submits a claim to the principal that says, I've done 193 meters of trench type A at unit rate $1,200 per meter, $400 per meter. This equates to a claim of $200,000 or whatever it is. The principal then assesses this. They then say, nope, you've only done 200 meters. We value this claim at X dollars. They negotiate this. They agree on a claim value. And that becomes the claim the contractor submits to the principal. Okay, partly tied into payment, and I mentioned it briefly when I spoke about retention and bank guarantees, but we also need to understand security. Security is fundamental to any construction contract, and it's basically financial guarantees that one party gives to the other. Typically, the contractor gives it to the principal, and it can come in the form of retention, where the client holds a portion of every payment claim, bank guarantee, where the contractor gives a sheet of paper to the principal saying there's $1 million in this bank account, and if I fail to complete the works, you can take this to the bank and take the money. Or the third form of security, which isn't written into the contract but works the same, is the value of the work completed by the contractor that they have not been paid for. So the contract specifies the form of security the principal will hold, the amount of security, the timing when it will be returned at practical completion and at the end of the defect liability period, and the process the principal can use to draw down the security. So if they're going to take money off the contractor from their security, what is the process they need to follow? So the principal can access this security, and this is what most contracts say, whenever the contractor is in default and failing to complete the work under the contract. This means any additional costs incurred by the principal can be recovered from the security. For example, if the contractor is failing to rectify their defects, the principal has given them notice, asked them to come back and fix their defects, and they're refusing. The principal can then access this security. They can take this money and use it to pay another contractor to come back and fix their defect. If the contractor has left the site dangerous, maybe they've left a huge open excavation in the road, they're not coming back to fix it, the principal can access the security to get them to fix it, or basically whenever there's a reason, the principal can take work off the contractor and engage another contractor to rectify any shortfall. Insurance and risk are another core concept in any construction contract, and it's this idea of who covers what when things go wrong. So insurance, as you know, the same as you get home or car insurance, construction contracts also nominate requirements for contractors to hold insurance. So insurance provides compensation for a specified loss and is a risk management tool. It's mandated in construction contracts to protect the principal or third party if a risk plays out and the contractor is unable to cover the cost. The types needed depend on the work being completed by the contractor. The contract nominates the type of insurances the contractor needs to hold and the level of cover, whether it's $20 million or whatever. Okay, so the main types of insurances you see in construction contracts are contractors' all-risk insurance, which covers loss or damage to the works for the project duration and is taken out by the head contractor. Got public liability insurance, which covers damage to people and property outside of the work and is required for all parties involved in a construction contract. We've got workers' compensation insurance, which covers the costs associated with injuries and rehabilitation to construction workers. It's generally mandated by law. And then we've got professional indemnity insurance, which is when you're providing any sort of professional service or technical expertise, which covers any breach in duty. So if you're a civil engineer designing a foundation, you design a foundation the wrong depth, you're covered by professional indemnity insurance. Now, depending on the project specifics, other types of insurances may be required. For example, if you're buying expensive plant overseas and you're shipping it, the contract may say that you need maritime transit insurance. Now, the next topic, the one everyone loves, variations. How do we manage change of the contract? So when we were talking about payment mechanism, when we spoke about fixed fee contracts, we said the contractor is paid fixed fee for completing a scope of works in accordance with the contract. Variations are how we manage changed scope, time, quality, project requirements, and how the corresponding fixed fee is adjusted. So basically, the principal changes the requirements, then the fixed fee needs to be adjusted to reflect this, and that is managed through variations. There's two core types of variations. There's variations instructed or requested by the principals, and there's variations claimed by the contractor. So a variation proposed is when the principal acknowledges before the fact that there's been a change. For example, they're building a building and the principal says, oh no, I actually want this new architectural feature outside of the building. It was never in the scope to begin with. The process for a variation proposed is that the principal proposes the additional scope to the contractor. The key here, again, is that it's agreed before the proposal. Everyone agrees there's a change to the project scope. The contractor will then review this requirement and then advises the feasibility of it and the cost or schedule impacts to the project. For example, they say to add this new architectural feature, it's going to take us a month longer to finish the project and it's going to cost $100,000. The principal will then review and assess this and they'll negotiate it to determine whether they agree to this cost impact or whether they actually want to proceed with the change. They then decide whether to proceed with it as either an approved variation or they decline it. If they decline it, there's no change to the project scope. They approve it, then there's adjustment by the time and the cost agreed to in the variation. Now, on the other hand, we've got variations claimed. So these are everyone's least favorite topic. It's where all the arguments occur on projects and it's where the contractor believes something has changed and they present this to the principal and say, hey, you've delayed us by accessing site by 1 month. Because of this, we need an extra month to finish the project and you need to pay for our indirect costs for another month, which is going to be $100,000. They become aware of the grounds for a claim. So the key here, which is different to a variation proposed, is with a variation proposed, everybody agrees there's been a change to the scope. With a variation claimed, there is no implied agreement that there's been a change. So which means the principal will argue, one, that the change exists in the first place, and then 2, the cost impact of the change. So in this situation, the contractor becomes aware of the grounds for a claim. Hey, you've delayed us accessing to site. They'll present this justification. They'll submit a notice of the claim and details of the claim. Now, contracts have in them time bars. A time bar just means that once you become aware of a change, you might only have 48 hours within which you have to notify your client. If you're late in notifying them of the change, you may not actually be entitled to claim for the change. So you have to submit any notices within a time bar. The claim is then assessed by the principal superintendent. You might have extra time to prepare your cost estimate. How they assess the claim will be the cause, so who has actually caused it. Obviously, if the contractor is late in ordering materials, they can't bill the principal for that. There's no grounds for a claim. But if the principal or they're both at fault, then there will be grounds for a claim. They'll assess the impact of the claim. So they'll have agreed the claim exists. Then they assess the cost and time impact. They negotiate it. They review the impact of the schedule. Has a critical path activity been delayed? And then they determine what compensation or change the contractor is. Now, once we talk about variations in claims, it only makes sense to then talk about disputes, because all disputes start with arguments over variations in scope. In the contract are specific mechanisms for how to resolve disputes. What happens when things go wrong? What happens when the principal and the contractor aren't getting along? Typically, what causes disputes are payment issues, delays to payment, arguing over payment claims, variation disagreements, and EOT disagreements. The contract will have specific resolution mechanisms within it. So the contract might specify that first you have to have a site meeting, then it has to get escalated to senior representatives from the company, then you have to go to mediation, and then if none of that can be resolved, you go to arbitration in the courts. In Australia, because payment is such a big issue, and in most countries where contractors use it as a bullying tactic for subcontractors, there's very strict laws around payment in the Security of Payment Act. To manage disputes effectively, you need really good records, site diaries, records, drawings, exactly what's happened and why it's happened. And at all costs, you should avoid escalation. It's always better to manage things as a project team, the site level, rather than going to senior management. And finally, last but not least, we've got termination, how the contract can be ended. The contract within it will specify when and how the contract can be terminated. So for cause, when there's a serious breach by one party for another, for example, if the principal has stopped paying the contractor, or the contractor has walked off site and is not doing the work, some contracts will have it so the principal can terminate the contract for convenience, or there can be mutual termination. Both parties agree not to do the work. The procedure around termination will pretty much be there'll be some sort of notice period. The contractor will have to make the site safe and demobilization, and there'll need to be financial settlements. So the contractor will need to get paid for the work they've completed, and there's also risk protection. So termination clauses when the principal can terminate the contract, or if the subcontractor or contractor goes insolvent, how to manage the insolvency process. Next, let's talk about different types of construction contracts. In the previous section, we spoke about all the different parties involved in delivering a project. The project model or the contract type specifies how all these different parties are going to work together, and the project owner needs to choose the optimal contract model to best suit the type of project and their objectives. So talking about the contract model, we're really talking about answering a couple of quick key questions. Things like who does what? Who's responsible for the design? Who's responsible for the construction? How is payment structured? Is it going to be cost reimbursable, or is it going to be lump sum? Who bears the different risks for the project delivery? The cost risk, the time risk, risk for design errors, and then also how is the project model going to be used? So all these questions need to be answered to come up with the optimal contract model. So the first most common construction model we see is the construct-only model. So the construct-only model is where the client completes the design themselves. So the project owner directly engages the engineer or architect to complete the detailed design. All the contractor is doing is getting given this IFC set of drawings and building to the drawings. It is also referred to as traditional procurement. The contractor quotes off the design to build the design, the contractor builds the design, and any issues with the design become a variation to the contract. If there's an error or an omission in the design, the contractor will get paid for the rework associated with that. Payment is fixed and lump sum. The contractor bears all the risk for the construction cost, but does not bear any of the design risk. So these are used in traditional projects, and you need to have a client or a project owner who knows what they're doing. They need to be able to manage the design themselves, pick up constructability issues, pick up value engineering opportunities. So it's typically done on more traditional building projects. Design and construct is where the contractor is engaged for both the detailed design and the construction of the project. So the client prepares an initial concept design and specification. The contractor quotes to complete the detailed design and construction. So they, based off this concept design and the specifications, they'll need to take the design to IFC and then build in accordance with this design. The client selects their preferred contractor, which is going to be a combination of their price to deliver the works, but also the technical solution they're proposing. So when the contractor is tendering for the works, typically they'll complete a 15% or a tender design revision, which the client will review, and they'll make the decision based off both the design and the construction solution. The contractor then manages the architect and the engineer to take the design to IFC, and then they construct this IFC design. Again, payment is fixed, lump sum. The contractor is bearing all the risk. The contractor in this contract model is also bearing the design risk. So any issues with the detailed design, the IFC drawings, any omissions, any lost opportunities, the contractor is bearing that risk. The only exception to this would be when the principal is requesting a change to the initial specifications or concept design. This model is best used when you want a single point of accountability in the contractor. However, the project owner does not have the expertise to manage the design themselves. So they want the contractor to identify the value engineering opportunities and factor this into their pricing. Now, so construct only, design and construct, they're both lump sum contracts. The contractor is paid a fixed fee for delivering the work. A cost plus contract is a cost reimbursable contractor where the contractor is paid for the actual costs of doing the work plus a fee. So the client chooses a contractor based on their experience or capability. The design is done by the client, it's given to the contractor, and they deliver the project as per the client's directions. The contractor is paid the actual cost of the works plus a fixed fee or percentage markup. Might be 7%, might be 15%, depending on the contract type. In this situation, the client is bearing all of the financial risk, and because of this, the contractor has less of an incentive to be efficient and cost effective. These types of cost plus contracts are used when for time critical work or what scope is hard to define or messy. So for example, if you're doing a brownfield upgrade to rail infrastructure where it's not clear what's already installed, what has to be replaced, this would be an example of a cost plus contract. A target cost contract is similar to a cost plus. However, the contractor and the client agree to a budget for the project and they share underruns and overruns. So in this situation, the contractor isn't bearing all of the cost risk like a construct only or a design and construct contract, but they're agreeing to a maximum cost and then they're going to share any overruns or underruns. So the contractor is incentivized to be more efficient with their spending. Then the contractor delivers the project. The payment for the contractor will be the actual costs of doing the work, plus their markup, plus their pain or gain share. This is used on complex, high-risk projects where you can't find it. Typically, a project owner would want to engage a contractor under a construct-only contract, but a lot of contractors might not accept that. There might be huge risks, or there might be situations where the contractor will almost certainly be able to claim for variations or additional scope. Using a target cost contract, you don't have that same adversarial relationship when change happens with construct only and design and construct contracts. Now, the final contract model we'll talk about is a construction management agreement. This is where the client hires the contractor to manage the project on their behalf. So the contractor is engaged almost as a professional service provider in the same way as a design engineer or an architect's engaged. So the client would select the contractor based on their experience and their capability to manage the project. The contractor would manage the trades, the engineers, the architects, the third parties. They basically manage the project on behalf of the client as opposed to doing it under a fixed fee. So in terms of how payments worked, the contractor would quote to deliver the construction management services. So they paid a fixed fee for the services they provide, but the subcontractors are all engaged directly by the project owner. So the project owner is paying the actual cost of delivering the project. In this situation, the client is bearing all of the financial risk, all of the areas with any issues with the design, any issues with construction works on site. The client is bearing all of those. The contractor is purely acting as a coordinator. These construction management projects are typically used for fast-tracked or complex projects, but they're also used for mega projects. Say there's some $40 billion oil and gas facility upgrade where the project is just too big of a financial risk for a contractor to take on as a design and constructor, as an EPC. It's very typical that the project owner still needs the expertise of a competent contractor, so they'll engage them under a construction management agreement and they'll help to manage large subcontractors. So that was a really brief, simple overview of some of the typical contract models we see. Now we're going to move on to talking about contract management. So far we've spoken about the different types of contracts, what contracts are, the different parties involved in a contract. Now it's time to talk about how to actually manage contracts to boost your profit, reduce your risk, and optimize your cash flow. So when we introduce the idea of contracts, we use the analogy of the rules of a game. Contracts aren't just a legal document, it's a rule book for how the project should be delivered. It tells you what to do in different situations. But knowing the rules isn't enough. You need to be able to play the game, which is where contract management comes in. Contracts are the rules. Contract management is how you play the game. It's about understanding your obligations, managing risk, securing your entitlements, and navigating challenges that come up throughout the project, all by playing by the rules, but knowing how to play to win. So what is the goal of effective contract management? Well, the first one is to get paid for the work you do, but also to get what you paid for with your subcontractors and suppliers. It's about minimizing disputes as they come up, handling delays, claims, and risks to ensure you get your entitlements and you're getting your obligations, but also ensuring that you're not exposed to unnecessary liabilities. So there's two stages to contract management. There's contract formation and contract administration. Contract formation is the stage when we set up and negotiate the agreement. We set up an agreement with our client that ensures we've got reasonable terms and conditions and the opportunity to make money on the project. And we negotiate agreements with our subcontractors to ensure we're getting the best value for money from the market. Contract administration is then executing the project, ensuring we're fulfilling our obligations, but also receiving our entitlement. So contract administration, we can break down into two key sets of tasks. We've got business as usual activities. So this covers the sets of activities that are undertaken when everything is going as planned. This means the project scope is unfolding as expected. We're not dealing with any major changes, and both parties are complying with their rights and obligations. Then the second set of contract administration tasks, we've got change and issue management. This is the management of exceptional circumstances and issues as they arise. These processes arise as a result from changing circumstances, changes to the scopes, changes to the conditions, or poor performance by one of the parties. So we can break down formation, administration into the downstream and upstream contracts. The upstream contract being the contract with our client, the downstream contracts being the contracts with our supply chain, our subcontractors and suppliers. We've already spoken about, but these are the four different groups of tasks we'll go through during contract management. Tendering is us quoting and negotiating a contract and signing a contract with our client. That's upstream contract formation. Then once we sign that contract, the head contract, we've got head contract administration. Downstream, dealing with our subcontractors, we've got procurement, which is finding and signing agreements with our supply chain. Then once these agreements are executed, we've got subcontractor administration. So making sure we get what we paid for. We're going to cover each of these in a lot more detail, but these different domains all have tools, techniques, and processes we follow. Tendering, head contract formation, it's about understanding the client's contract, preparing your bid, and negotiating the terms so you can secure a project that you make money on. Procurement, it's about finding the best value for money subcontractors in the market. So engaging subcontractors, suppliers that match our terms, our conditions, and take on our head contract risks. Head contract administration, it's about managing your obligations with the client, getting your entitlements and getting extra time and money if the scope changes. Subcontract administration, it's about managing your subcontractors so that they perform and you don't incur additional costs. As we're going to cover in each of the next 4 sections, the tools and techniques we're going to be learning with tendering, it's contract reviews, how to identify risks and how to identify qualifications with your bids. Procurement, it's about establishing and writing a good scope of works, taking your head contract obligations and passing them on to your subcontracts, and negotiating and signing subcontract agreements. Head contract administration, it's about maintaining a program, maintaining a variation register, submitting variations, getting variations approved, and keeping good records in a site diary. Subcontract administration, it's about maintaining a program for your subcontractors, coordinating their works, managing any variations and claims from them, and again, documenting and keeping strong records. So the first of the 4 domains of contract management we're going to dive into is tendering. Head contract formation. How do we secure the best possible contract with our client? How do we secure a contract at our price with our terms and conditions where we can guarantee we make money during execution? So head contract formation or tendering, it's about signing a contract that gives us the best possible chance of making money. This is going to be a function of the price and the terms and conditions. The price is what we quote to do the work, what we're going to get paid to deliver the project, but also the terms and conditions. Who's responsible for what, how we get paid, payment mechanisms, whether we're responsible for liquidated damages, what type of security we have to get. We want to basically negotiate and sign a contract that gives us the best possible chance to generate profit. And that's a function of the price and terms and conditions, but also how we strategize and identify opportunities for profit during execution. Okay, so why is this challenging? Well, first one is that the construction industry is largely commoditized, which means clients are going to 3 to 6 contractors to deliver a project. Everyone's trying to give the lowest possible price, and the client is going to choose the cheapest price, most likely. On top of that, the client is going to be passing on to us obligations to do the work. There'll be design obligations, there'll be technical obligations, there'll be commercial obligations, and with these obligations comes a large amount of risk if we don't perform. It's going to be a complicated scope. There's going to be lots of different ways to get caught out. There's a lot of different things we could potentially miss. There'll be complex technical requirements. There'll be requirements to deal with stakeholders. There'll be requirements to get certain approvals to do the work. All of these things make the scope of what we have to do complicated and increase. And when you factor in the fact that it's a commoditized industry and the client's going to be going for the cheapest price, basically we're going to be caught in a situation where it's a race to the bottom on a complicated scope, and it's increasingly likely that we're going to miss things. And on top of that, clients always want you to sign up to unfair terms and conditions. They're always going to be pushing their most aggressive, most unfair contract onto you with heavy liquidated damages, long payment terms, and it's our job to basically work against the forces of the industry and to negotiate the best possible agreement at the best possible price. Okay, so the first step in the head contract formation process is actually going to be receiving the tender documentation. The client contacts us, they want us to quote on a project for them. They're going to send us a package of documentation that includes the drawings, the specifications, the scope of works, the contract conditions, the schedule, all these things. And this might come from an email or it might come from some sort of tender portal like Aconex or Felix. First question in contract formation is really going to be, is this a project we want to do? Should we tender for this project? How much competition is there? Is this competition going to drive the price down and force us to take on unfair risks? Do we have a ton of other work going on and we don't have the capacity to manage it carefully? So the first part of contract formation is always going to be asking the question, should we tender for this project? The second part of this process is then reviewing the documentation. We want to perform a high-level review of all the documents that have been provided. The scope of works. Is the scope clear? What's included? What's excluded? The program. Can we meet the timeframes? Are they very aggressive? Are there major liquidated damages on multiple separable portions? And what are the contract terms like? Are there major risks? Are there the liquidated damages? Do they want huge amounts of security? Do they want to be able to draw down on security without notifying us? And when we're doing this, the key tools we want to create is an RFI or a big clarification register. So any questions or issues we have, we want to quickly ask them so we can get timeframes and responses back in time to support our tender. We also want to start preparing a qualification register, or also known as a departures register. So we want to start listing out all the parts of the contract, the scope of work, tender documentation, where we are not going to comply with. The next part of this process is preparing the estimate. So we need to build up our cost to complete the project. This is going to be based on the scope, quantities, production rates, and any market pricing we've got from our supply chain. There's going to be provisional items, there's going to be items that are excluded, and there's going to be areas of uncertainty and risk that we need to factor in. There's also going to be ways we transfer risk to our subcontractors. So if we have major subcontracts during the tendering phase, we want to basically get our subcontracts in a position where we can sign them as soon as we execute the head contract. So the tools we're going to use to do this will be our qualification and assumption register. This is a really important document because this is going to be the basis of our letter of offer, any exclusions we're making, any assumptions that we want to document and clarify with our submission. It's going to be our estimate, so our bottom-up direct cost estimate of how much we're estimating it's going to cost us to deliver the project, and also our subcontractor procurement. I can't stress this enough. If there are major subcontracts that we're procuring that we're going to rely on to deliver the project, we want those in a position where we can sign them as soon as the head contract is executed. We have a subcontractor that makes up 40% of the contract value. We rely on them. They've got activities on the critical path. Then basically if we're signing up to a separable portion or a completion date in the contract with heavy liquidated damages, we want to also, and we're relying on a subcontractor to deliver that, but we basically want to be signing a subcontract with that same risk transfer, the same completion date, the same liquidated damages associated with it. Now, once we've prepared our estimate, we want to create our assumptions and qualifications, our departures from the scope of works, what's included in our offer and what's excluded. This is not going to match the scope of works and requirements the client sent us. We will always have departures, and we need to clearly document what these are. What are we not offering to do? Does the client want us to supply all the permanent materials, but our pricing is based on them free issuing them to us? All of these have to be captured in our departures register. Any key assumptions we've got. Are we going to be able to work 7 days a week to meet their program? That has to be made crystal clear to them when we do this. Anything unusual or unclear, any key assumptions we've had to make has to go into our qualification register. Now, in line with this, so when we've prepared our estimate based on their documentation, we may or may not have reviewed the contract so far, but if we haven't, we need to review the contract terms. We need to do a detailed review of the contract and come up with any terms and conditions that we want to negotiate or depart. These might be things like payment terms. So they've got 45 days from end of month payment terms, and we're going to have cash flow issues. We'd want 20-day payment terms. If they want 10% security, we might only feel comfortable giving 5% security. Do they have heavy liquidated damages? And because we've developed a program, we've checked and we've shown we can't meet these dates, all of these have to go into our contract departures register. We have to look at all the terms and conditions. We have to nominate the terms and conditions we aren't happy with. We want to come up with a proposed rewriting of that term. Now, once we're ready to submit our bid, we've got our estimate, we've checked it, it's correct. We've gone through the scope of works, the documentation they provided, we've prepared our qualification register, we've reviewed the contract, and we've come up with our contract departures. We want to submit our letter of offer. This is our price and our terms to do the work. It's so important. I can't keep stressing this. Your price is one thing. It's the thing your client's going to focus on, but your terms and conditions are the opportunity for you to win the bid. Include your qualifications, your assumptions, any requested changes to the contract, and in your letter of offer, clearly document what your price to do the work is, but what your terms and conditions are as well. Your terms and conditions being your qualifications, the tender documentation, and your contract departures. The next step is to negotiate and sign the contract. Basically, what will happen now is that you've submitted your letter of offer. Your client will come back to say they like your price, they're unhappy with these qualifications, they want you to reprice, you'll go back and forward, go on for ages. But basically, you want to get to a position where you've agreed on both the price, the schedule, the scope, and the contract terms and conditions. To do this, you really want to do a detailed contract review. If you didn't do one at the tender stage, be incredibly happy to what you're signing up to. Critical thing here is that you want to ensure that your qualifications, your letter of offer, make it into the scope of works in the contract. I see it happen an unbelievable amount of times where people submit certain exclusions to scope, but they never follow up and never make sure they make it into the scope of works. So they'll price to do one thing, but their contract they sign says they're going to do another. So you need to ensure your qualifications, what you're negotiating, goes into the scope of works in the contract. The reality is throughout this entire process, and I say it all the time, is when you're negotiating a contract, everyone obsesses over the price and they never pay attention to the terms and conditions. The reality is everyone is going to be focused on your price. Everyone wants the cheapest contractor, but in terms of your ability to make money on a project, your terms matter just as much, if not more, than your price. And in a commoditized industry where there's so much downwards pressure on your price, everyone's going to be driving your price down. They'll want discounts. They'll always want to go with the cheapest contractor. If you can understand the terms and conditions and qualifications to scope and how they impact your price, you can negotiate down your price without actually reducing your profit margins. So that's your opportunity to focus on negotiating the terms while reducing your price to ensure you are, in their eyes, the cheapest contractor, but you're still maintaining your terms and conditions so you can make money on the project. Next up, once we've signed the head contract, we need to talk about procurement, subcontractor formation. How do we find the best possible subcontractors at the best possible price? How do we find the subcontractors we need to deliver the project while also ensuring we get value for money? Okay, so subcontract formation is the process of procurement. It's the process of engaging subcontractors and suppliers to deliver portions of the project work. It's basically how we transfer our obligations, our responsibilities under the head contract to our subcontractors at the best possible price. We need to find the subcontractors that we need to deliver the works. We also want to make sure we're getting value for money and the best possible pricing from the market. So what makes procurement so hard? And it is something that most projects stuff up to a certain degree. Well, the first one, again, complicated scopes. Construction projects are messy and complicated. There's multiple trades. There's multiple different staging. The methodology impacts the scope. Different vendors impact the products they choose will impact the scope. There's all these moving parts. And ultimately, 9 times out of 10, most construction projects are messy and complicated because they're technically complicated scopes. The other thing that makes procurement hard is that subcontractors, the suppliers we go to, just know more about the specific scope than you do. If you're going to a concreting contractor for a portion of the work, they'll know a lot more about concrete construction than you ever will. If you're buying inverters for a solar farm, you're going to the technical experts on the subject. So there's this knowledge gap between you and them, and they have opportunities take advantage of you because they just understand the scope better. The next one is confusing documentation. By the time you've put together a subcontract agreement, you've attached the scope of works, the drawings, the program, there's just every chance that there's mistakes, inconsistencies, and confusions in the documentation, and there's differing interpretations of the scope between you and the subcontractors, which can potentially lead to variations and disputes down the track. The last one is that procurement always happens fast. Construction projects are always done incredibly fast. There's a rapid transition from the design going to IFC, to get all our procurement done, signing up our subcontractors to starting on site. And often procurement is the portion of the project that everyone rushes through to basically go from an IFC design to starting on site as fast as possible. Okay, so how does the procurement process work? Well, step number 1 is we need to define the packages. We need to break the job into clear packages of works. For example, For building, we might have earthworks, concrete, like the building, the structural steel, the electrical. There'll be all these defined packages of work we need to complete. These packages are captured in our work breakdown structure, and then within each package, there'll be a set of documents that define the work we're going to be procuring. The drawings, specifications, the project requirements. The tools we use to break the project down and create all our different packages are the work breakdown structure and scope of works documents. Okay, so once the job is broken down and we've got our work breakdown structure and all the different packages we need to procure from the market, we need to create our tender packages, our detailed sets of drawings and specifications and scope of works documents that define exactly what we want to procure from the market. The litmus test I always use is to put myself in the subcontractor's position. There needs to be enough information in the tender package that if you were the estimator, you could price it. So for example, if you're procuring concrete construction works, what do they need? They need the structural engineering drawings. They need any concrete specifications. They need the date that they're going to work on site. They need the sequence of the build, what sequence they're getting access to the slabs. Are they doing the detailed excavation? Are they doing the piling? Are they doing the piling breakback? All these things need to be captured in the tender package we send them. We then send this package of information to 3 to 6 subcontractors per tender package. We want to get multiple quotes, so we're leveraging market competition. When I spoke about head contractor formation, I spoke about how construction was a commoditized industry. For head contractor formation, that's a negative for us. For procurement, that's our advantage. It's our opportunity to get multiple quotes per package and to get the best value for money from the market. Then we want to provide them a tender submission date, a date we need their response by, and then we want to liaise with the subcontractors to make sure they understand the information, what we've sent them, and what we're asking for. Now, once we get our quotes back from our subcontractors, the next step is we want to review and adjust the quotes as needed. When I spoke about head contractor formation, I spoke about departures and exclusions. When we get quotes back from subcontractors, we need to identify these same departures. If we're getting quotes for concrete construction and one subcontractor has excluded concrete pumping, but another has included, we would need to adjust their quotes and level them so we're comparing apples to apples. We use a quote comparison matrix or a tender clarification register to do this. But basically, for the 3 to 6 quotes we get, we want to make sure that they're all pricing the same thing. We can either adjust the quotes ourselves, or we can send them back to the subcontractors and ask them to adjust them. Now, once we've got our 3 to 6 quotes, we've leveled them, we're comparing apples to apples, we want to select our preferred subcontractor. This isn't going to be just based on price. We're so reliant on our subcontractors to deliver the project that the small savings we'd get by going to the cheapest subcontractor, if we know that they don't have the capability to deliver it, can quickly wipe out the entire project. So we want to choose a subcontractor based on the value they offer, the capability, whether they can meet the program, what risks they're happy to take on, and also the price. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to maximize the value to money ratio. We need a subcontractor who can perform the work safely, to program taking on certain risks, and we also want to make sure we're getting the best value for money. So we're also going to negotiate on their price. In the same way we negotiate our head contract, now we need to negotiate our subcontract. We need to make sure they're taking on all the scope we want them to, they're taking on the terms and conditions, and we've negotiated their price. Tools we're going to use to do this are the subcontract agreement, so the actual form of contract that they sign, and any internal approvals we need from our own management to sign off on the agreement. Once both parties are happy, we've agreed on the price, the scope, the program, and terms and conditions of the contract, we can sign the contract. Tools we're going to use to do this will be the actual contract form and the agreement checklist. We want to make sure that all of the obligations we're under for the head contractor are relevant to their scope of works they're signing up to. For example, if it's a subcontract on the critical path and they impact our completion date and we have liquidated damages, we should have liquidated damages in our subcontract. Once we do that, we can start the process of onboarding the subcontractor and getting ready to deliver the project. Okay, so that's the procurement process from start to finish. It's It's pretty simple. It's basically the opposite of the head contract formation process. We're on the other side of the fence. Some tips for procurement is to document everything and make sure what you're agreeing to makes its way into the contract to ensure your subcontract mirrors your head contract risk. So making sure any obligations you're under for the head contract, for that relevant subcontract, whether it's captured in the drawings, whether it's captured in the contract terms and conditions, you're passing on to your subcontractors. The key here is if you want to go properly back to back, you should be starting the procurement process during your tendering phase. So you should have back-to-back contracts for key packages of work. So that means as soon as you sign the head contract, you're signing up your subcontracts. So you're not getting caught between. You're not exposed to some risk that you can't transfer to your subcontractors. Do this by protecting your cost and responsibility by clearly documenting what you're responsible for, transferring to your subcontractors, and starting this process as early as possible. So once we've signed contracts, we've formed them, the next step is to administer them. We need to execute the project in line with our obligations and our entitlements. First off, we're going to talk about head contract administration. How do you manage the contract with your client to ensure you make money on the project? Head contract administration is the ongoing administration of the contract with your client. It's about ensuring that you deliver what's required and you get paid what you're entitled to. This means if your client delays you, if the scope changes, you get paid for these changes. So what makes head contract administration so hard? Well, first off is the high administrative load. As soon as the project starts getting delivered, you need to start safety documents, quality documents, managing the schedule, dealing with subcontractors, that all the administration tasks in the head contract can slowly start to slip. You stop paying attention to records, you stop maintaining the program. It's very easy to stop doing these key tasks. Second one is the risk and responsibility transfer. You've probably signed up to a whole lot of risks, completion dates with liquidated damages, all these things, and you're basically now accountable for everything. The scope, program, and conditions are probably going to be changing continuously. You'll be requested to price additional work. Things the client, access dates the client will have given you won't have been fulfilled. And there'll also be strict procedures you have to follow in the contract. If you miss a notice period or a deadline, you might get time barred and lose your entitlements. Okay, so to begin with, the business as usual head contract administration tasks. What are the regular ongoing tasks you need to do day in, day out to keep the project moving? First one will be your payment claims. So these are regular monthly invoicing of the client for the work you've completed, and you'll probably need to provide a lot of substantiation to these. Next will be project reporting. You might have to give a monthly report. You might have to give weekly schedule updates. You might have to give records of how many inclement weather days you've been delayed, whatever the contract says you need to report on, and to maintain and submit an up-to-date construction program as you work through the project. You'll also have regular meetings with your clients, which for these you should record meeting minutes and document any correspondence formally with action items and agreed upon solutions. Again, when disputes start to come up, meeting minutes are unbelievably important. You'll need compliance records, for example, safe work method statements, insurances, quality assurance documents, subcontractor onboarding forms. All of these compliance records will have to be documented, may have to be submitted to the client, and also any requests for information. So questions to your clients about issues with the design, changes, access dates, all of these RFIs, and any communication about change will have to be documented. Okay, so that's the business as usual task. What about when things change? How do you deal with changes and issues? Well, the first one will be extension of time claims for delays. If your client's late in giving you site access, you'll need to claim for more time so you can adjust your completion date. You'll have to put in variation claims, both claims to the client when you think something's changed and requests from the client to do additional work, and also any back charges and credits when there's quality issues, when there's scope overlaps. The client may try to take work off you or may try to reduce your contract value. So these are some of the ways the contract can change and what you'll have to continually be working through on the project. So when things change, you always have to consider notice requirements. What sort of time frames do you have to give your client? You might have to give them notice within 48 hours. You might have 5 days to do it. And then after that, provide substantiation and valuation of the change. So you might need records, photos, an impact to the program, correspondence. That's why records matter so much when you're talking about head contract administration and documentation. You always need to be able to prove what you're saying, because basically construction budgets are tight. Anytime you're trying to claim for more money or time, client is incentivized to push back as hard as they can. So what documentation should you be maintaining? You should always have a variation register. You should always have a delay or event notification template. So some simple template you can send your client to say, because of XYZ, we've been delayed as per the original baseline program, RFI registers, and claims and correspondence folder. So tracking all the correspondence about certain claims, if they're approved, if they're not. Basically, what you're trying to do through the head contract administration process is to secure your entitlements, reduce disputes, and protect your margins. If you don't manage this properly, you risk not getting paid for what you're owed. You lose the ability to claim for time or cost if you don't meet your notice periods, and you absorb risks that should sit with your client. Okay, so we've spoken about how to manage and administer head contract. Let's talk about how to administer the subcontracts. How do you ensure you're getting what you're paying for? Most contractors at best leave money on the table, and at worst go broke because they don't manage their contracts properly. So in this video, I'm going to show you 10 contract management mistakes contractors make that can very easily send them broke. These mistakes are going to be broken down into contract formation mistakes, mistakes before you sign the contract, and contract administration mistakes, mistakes during execution of the project. Okay, so the goal of contract formation is to sign a contract with terms and conditions and a price that gives you the best possible chance of making money. Subcontract administration is about managing your subcontractors and suppliers to ensure they deliver on time, to the specifications, and within the budget, while protecting your own commercial position with your client. It's about getting what you paid for, covering yourself. At the end of the day, depending on the type of project, your subcontract costs might make up 70 to 80% of the total project value, which at the end of the day means you're relying on your subcontractors to deliver the project. You need to be managing them properly. So the goal of subcontract administration is to ensure subcontractors deliver their scope at the agreed cost, on time, and without exposure to risk. This means avoiding scope gaps or delays, preventing back charges or disputes, ensuring your head contract obligations have been passed on and you're managing those, and maintaining cash flow and commercial control. So why is subcontract administration so difficult? Well, at the end of the day, yes, your subcontractors are on site. Yes, you've signed a contract with them, but you're still accountable for the work they perform. They go insolvent, they go broke, if they decide to get into some huge dispute and they walk off the job, your client doesn't care. It's still your obligation to manage the work. The other reason it's hard is, again, I spoke about the knowledge gap between general contractor and subcontractor. Your subcontractors know more about the work, and they often will come up with their own strategies to maximize their own profit. And if scope isn't crystal clear, it becomes a battle of assumptions, and they're always going to know the work better than you. They're always going to have their own strategies to make money from variations. Subcontractors have their own priorities. They might have 10 jobs on at once. They might have another job that's going bad, that's taking all of their management attention. They'll have their own priorities, their own separate business with their different interests, which at times, because construction, once you sign a contract, is by definition a zero-sum game. Every dollar you pay them is a dollar you don't get. They are going to have different priorities to you. And again, it comes down to personalities, relationships. You are going to be working very closely with these people, and sometimes you're going to be working with difficult people, people who are adversarial, all these sorts of things. So subcontract administration can be incredibly hard. Okay, so what are the business as usual subcontract administration activities? Well, you'll need to onboard your subcontractors, you'll need to get their insurances, their safe work method statements, organize their site inductions. You'll have regular coordination meetings with them where you go through the program, their access to site dates, how they're going with their works, when they plan to be finished. They'll submit their own payment claims to you for review and approval. You'll assess the works, approve them. they'll be submitting variations to you. So they'll claim certain scopes have changed, certain things have changed, and you'll need to monitor their performance of the work. Are they on time? Are they doing the work correctly? Is their quality correct? All these sorts of things. Okay, so what are the core business as usual tools you're going to be using? There'll be things like onboarding checklists, your payment claim assessment templates, subcontractor variation logs, site diaries, records, and your construction program. Can't stress this enough. The program is one of the most important contract management tools, both with managing the head contract and managing all of your subcontracts. Okay, so those are the business as usual tasks. What about change and issue management? What happens when things change from what was agreed on during contract formation? Well, you might have subcontractors who are underperforming. They might not be resourcing the project properly. They might miss their own start dates. They might poorly manage the work. They might be late in ordering materials. All these sorts of issues can come up. There might be disputes over scope. They might be claiming things or variation when you don't think they are. They might have defects. They might have rework, and they might not be fixing it properly, or they might be saying it's not their responsibility to fix. Or you could have safety or compliance issues. They could be continually performing the works poorly. All these sorts of issues happen on every single project. Okay, so how do you manage these sorts of subcontract issues? Well, the first one is going to be notices and back charge. If your subcontractor is not rectifying their defects within a set period of time, you should be sending them notices. If you have had to do work for them, you should be back charging them for it and setting it off against your payment claims. They're submitting you variations. You should, if you've set up your contracts correctly, you should always have head contract entitlements for variations. If you've set up your subcontracts properly, a lot of the time there will be variations which you can't claim from your head contracts, which will have to come out of your contingency. But again, you should be negotiating these variations with the subcontracts. You should be asking for detailed breakdowns, how they've priced it. You should be fact checking their pricing because they're always going to try and inflate their costs. If they are underperforming, and you have to be very careful with this because there's a lot of legal regulations around this, but you should withhold payment if you are entitled to according to the contract. You should always be very fair about how you do this, but it is a negotiation tactic you can use. And you should have clear records. You should have photos, meeting minutes, correspondence trails, everything to back up what you're doing. Again, in line with the contract and in line with what's fair and reasonable. You shouldn't be bullying your contractors and taking advantage of them, but you shouldn't let them take advantage of you either. Okay, so what are the tools we currently use? We use delay notices and templates. We use non-conformance registers. We might be sending our subcontractors NCRs. We might have back charge registers, variation registers, and also, as always, communication logs. Most contractors at best leave money on the table and at worst go broke because they don't manage their contracts properly. So in this video, I'm going to show you 10 contract management mistakes contractors make that can very easily send them broke. These mistakes are going to be broken down into contract formation mistakes before you sign the contract, and contract administration mistakes during execution of the project. So the goal of contract formation is to sign a contract with terms and conditions and a price that gives you the best possible chance of making money. First big mistake contractors make is they focus on price over terms and conditions. If contractor A submits a quote for $100,000 and contractor B submits a quote for $200,000, which contractor is cheaper? Well, the obvious answer is contractor A. The reality is you don't actually know the answer to that question until you understand the terms, conditions, and clarifications that surround that offer. The reality is everybody in the construction industry focuses on price, but the reality is contractor A might have submitted a quote, excluded 90% of the scope, not signed up to liquidated damages, want faster payment terms, and have all these other qualifications when contractor B has agreed to do everything in the specifications. The takeaway is because everybody in the industry focuses on price, terms, conditions, and scope are your opportunity. You can be willing to negotiate on price because the construction industry is a commoditized industry. People choose the cheapest contractors, but if you can clarify your terms, conditions, and scope, so you can pull down your price, but still structure your terms and conditions so you have the opportunity to make money, it will increase the chances of securing a profitable contract. Mistake number 2 is trusting relationships over writing. On my last project, we had a fantastic relationship with the client project manager. where he'd worked on the pre-contract stage and then was there at the start of project execution. We'd agreed on everything. We'd started delivering the work, and then the client swapped project managers. They brought in a new project manager who read the contract to the letter, and a whole lot of things we thought we weren't responsible for were not clearly documented in the contract, and he used that to their advantage. So even though we'd previously agreed on certain things, they swapped project managers, and then the new project manager read the contract to the letter of the law. This is a classic contract management mistake. Assuming a good relationship with your client will protect you, and 90% of the time it probably will. It's the 10% of the time where you're caught out that can lead to real disaster. So have a good relationship, but also insist everything is in writing and everything is documented crystal clear. Mistake number 3 is not agreeing to a program. I'm shocked how many contractors sign up to a contract with heavy liquidated damages without a clear construction program showing them what dates they're relying on to meet their completion date in the contract. Basically, people agree to build something by a certain date without any understanding of what has to be in place to meet that date. If you do this, you're signing up to delays that you'll wear the cost of without any control over them. The key takeaway is a construction program that clearly defines the access dates, what dates you're relying on from the client. It gives you the opportunity to claim delays if you're delayed. So the construction program is one of the key contract management documents. Mistake number 4 is signing up to harsh payment terms. Contractors pay wages weekly. They may have to pay suppliers upfront, but then they sign contracts where they get paid 30 days or 45 days from end of month. Basically, from the day you start the work, you might be 2 months behind on payments. So basically, you're financing the project. Cash flow is a bigger source of insolvency in the construction industry than the profitability of projects. Don't just accept the payment terms in the contract, negotiate them and push back on them. Push for 20-day payment terms, cash retention over bank guarantees, interest on late payments, mobilization and early costs that you can claim in the payment schedule. Anything you can to ensure that you're getting paid before you're incurring costs. Mistake number 5 is not getting back-to-back risk transfer with your supply chain. If you're relying on your subcontractors to deliver the project for you and you're not getting back-to-back risk transfer, you're basically signing a contract to guarantee the performance of your subcontractors without any guarantees from them. If prices change or scope shifts, basically you're caught between and you're going to wear these additional costs. The key takeaway is before you sign a contract with your client, set up your subcontracts, agree to the scope, the terms and conditions, the program, everything you're responsible from the head contract, ensure your subcontractors can achieve that, and the day you sign the head contract, be ready to sign up your subcontractors. Okay, so avoiding these 5 mistakes should get you to the point where you've signed a contract with your best possible chance of making money. Next, what can you do during project execution to ensure your project is profitable? The first mistake during contract administration to avoid is never do additional work unless you have a written variation. Multiple times in my career, I've had clients ask for additional work, instruct us to do it, and then when they get the bill for it, to dispute the original instruction. They might think it's all well and good to tell you to do something, but then they're shocked when the bills come in and they'll clarify that, oh no, they didn't mean that, or no, they didn't actually want you to do that work, and they'll try and get out of paying you for the additional work. If you don't have it in writing, it becomes a he said, she said situation. So before you do any additional work, make sure you submit a variation, you agree on the price, because once you've done the work, you lose all of your negotiating power. The next mistake is not getting paid early and often. As soon as you start doing work, put in a payment claim, try to get paid early and often, even do a test payment claim so the process is ironed out, there's no issues. So when you start spending huge amounts of money, you've already got a structure for how to get paid and you've already worked through the process with your client. The next mistake, and I'm guilty of having done this multiple times, is not dealing with change as specific issues, but bundling a whole lot of variations together into one big messy claim that gets disputed. I was working on a major electrical job and there were about 10 changes to the lighting server works. We bundled this together into one big variation claim and it was a mess. The client suddenly got confused by all the changes. Everyone was confused on what was happening, how it was valued, what the original change was, how the change impacted the price. When you're dealing with variations, it's much better to have a lot of small changes where everyone agrees on the change and the valuation of the change than to try to bundle 10 variations together into one big claim. The key takeaway is submit small, clear variations with specific details on what changed, why it changed, what's the cost impact, and any supporting documentation. It will be so much easier to get these approved. The next big mistake I see is not maintaining a construction program. As I was saying during contract formation, the program is your tool for claiming additional time and cost if the client is late in giving you access. The only way you can do this is if you maintain an up-to-date and relevant construction program. Update the program weekly, track plan versus actual, go through it at your weekly meetings with the client. They'll see you as more professional for doing so, and it will also be incredibly easy to justify any EOT or claims you make. And the final one that most general contractors are guilty for is letting and forgetting your subcontracts. We sign a contract with our subcontractors, we send them the drawings, we tell them what date to come to site, and then we basically just assume they're going to manage themselves. And a lot of really good subcontractors will. That's basically all you have to do. It's the subcontractors that underperform, make mistakes, and don't manage the work properly that you get caught out for. So even if you trust your subcontractors, you know they're going to do a really good job, you still need to stay on top of them. If you just assume they know what they're going to do and they don't, you're setting yourself up for failure. Rework, delays, and cost blowout. So the key takeaway is micromanage your subcontractors, track everything, how they're going with their quality, where they're up to in the program, what work's completed, what's not completed. Go and physically check this for yourself. Check on their safety, how they're performing, and inspect everything. That old saying, trust but verify.